Now, what do you do if you want a car that looks sporty, but you don't necessarily want the big engine? Well, in Ford's case, you go for an ST-Line. With Vauxhall, you go for a GSi. With Suzuki, when it comes to the Swift, you buy a Swift Attitude. Of course, before I do anything else, I have to ask you to like this video, comment, share, and subscribe. Do it as vocally as that motorcycle. This is the Suzuki Swift Attitude, and it is essentially a standard Suzuki Swift in a fancy frock. You get a carbon effect front splitter, rear diffuser, and side skirts. You get a slightly different front grille with a new chrome surround. You get a different front bumper. You get new 16-inch alloy wheels. You get tinted rear windows. You get fog lights. Oh, and I can't forget as well, you get an Attitude badge finished in carbon effect. Stuck on, it looks quite beautiful. It is really the closest thing you'll get to a Swift Sport without actually buying a Swift Sport. And I think it looks pretty smart. I'm not sure I'd go for the silver that this car's got. I think I'd go for something a little bit brighter, but that's just personal preference. Overall, it's a good looking little car. Every Swift is a good looking little thing. However, if you buy a Ford Fiesta ST-Line, the ride height is dropped ever so slightly and the springs are slightly stiffer. With the Swift Attitude, mechanically it is identical to a standard Swift. All of the changes are purely cosmetic. You can also only get the entry-level engine that you get with a standard Swift. It's a 1.2 litre 4-cylinder naturally aspirated petrol. It'll get more than 50 miles to the gallon, sure. I mean, I've done more than 230 miles now and I've used half a tank, which isn't very much at all. But 0 to 62 miles an hour takes 11.9 seconds and the top speed is 111 miles an hour. It's not exactly breathtaking. So what's the point, really? Why wouldn't you just buy a normal, standard Suzuki Swift? I wondered that until I remembered how many people put AMG or M badges on their Mercedes or BMWs when they aren't AMGs or M cars. It's the same reason why people are so willing to spend a little bit of extra money to put the bigger wheels, the tinted windows, the slightly sportier looking bumper on their new cars. It's because for some people, they don't want the extra performance. The sporty look is more than enough. With that in mind, what's it like to drive? Well, it's very swift. I'm sorry, I just can't help myself. It drives like every other Swift, i.e. it's actually quite good fun. It tips the scales at 980 kilos, which is about 180 kilos less than a Ford Fiesta. And you can feel that lack of weight straight away. On one hand, you can feel that some things, like the doors for example, are much lighter than those of a Fiesta, and the whole car generally feels slightly less solid than a Fiesta, but also it just feels so chuckable, so nimble, like you can hurl it into a corner at any speed you want, and because it just doesn't weigh anything, it'll just stick. It inspires so much confidence. And yes, the steering isn't what I would call feelsome, but the front end is so keen to turn in. The engine doesn't have much power. It's got 88 brake horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 89 pounds-feet of torque at 4,400 RPM. But again, it doesn't really matter as much as you might think because the car weighs so little. You've just got to make the most of the gears and really rev the engine out. Above 4,000 RPM, there we go. It really starts to try. Go on, there we go. The red line is 6,300 RPM though, so you haven't got much room to work with. Speaking of gears, you've got a 5-speed manual, and it's a bit light, it's a little bit floppy. The gearbox in the Swift Sport definitely feels a little bit tighter. And because it's a 5-speed rather than a 6-speed, the gears are quite long, so as I said, sometimes you've really got to rev the engine hard because when you change up a gear, the revs drop down more than they would if, let's say, you had a 6-speed. As for the suspension and the brakes, well, it is softer than a Swift Sport, so there's more roll, and it's less compliant than a Fiesta. But roll here brings playfulness. when you brake hard, when you chuck it into a corner, you can feel it just start to move around, and not in a way that scares you at all. It's just good, simple fun. You'll hear sometimes people talk about how small, simple, lightweight, low-powered cars can be fun to drive. This is a perfect example of that. Ultimately, the Swift Attitude is good fun, even if it is the same mechanically as every other Swift and it has the lowest powered engine. Essentially, what you've got to do is decide, do you want to pay the extra money for a car that has that slightly sportier look? If the answer is no, then just stick to a normal Swift. They have the same feeling of lightness, agility, playfulness and simple fun as this does. So what do you think of the Swift Attitude? Would you pay the extra money for that slightly sportier look, or would you just stick with a normal Swift? Or would you go the whole hog and get a Swift Sport? Or maybe something different, like the Fiesta? Let me know in the comments below.